Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast Radio.
Welcome back to Southeast Radio's Business Matters with me, Karl Fitzpatrick. Well, Amanda Shantz received critical acclaim for her research on building ethically strong organisations, and she joins me now to discuss this very topic. Amanda, we'll be discussing your award-winning research about building an ethically strong organisation. But first, perhaps you can tell us about your own background and your role within Trinity College Dublin.
Sure. It's very nice to speak to you. I'm glad to be here today. I am currently an associate professor in Trinity Business School in Human Resource Management and Organizational Behavior. I'm also the director of our MBA program here in the business school. You might tell from my accent that I'm actually not Irish. I'm originally from Canada, but I've been living here in Ireland for nearly 3 years now. I've been doing research around ethics and corporate social responsibility and employee volunteering now for several years, working with organizations within the UK primarily, and now starting to work with some companies in Ireland.
So your research on building an ethically strong organisation has received many plaudits and external recognition. But what triggered you to conduct this research?
Well, we were interested in looking at something called, or something that we were calling purposeful leadership. So we were looking at leaders who were able to create a strong sense of purpose in their organization and the impact of that on employee outcomes, such as motivation, work engagement, and performance. But in our investigation, we came across something that was quite unexpected. And so that was the motivation behind the paper, was to explore some of these unanticipated findings that were coming out of the data.
And how do you define purposeful leadership?
And the way that we define purposeful leadership in our work in this area, it's a leader who has a strong moral compass. So a leader who knows in him or herself what's right and wrong. Now, we're agnostic to that, and what's right to one person may be wrong to another. But the important part is that a leader has a firm identity or knowledge around what they believe, what he or she believes is right or wrong. A purposeful leader is also strongly committed to stakeholders. So they care about employees, they care about, of course, shareholders. They also care about the community and the environment in which they operate. The third facet or third area of purposeful leadership is having a strong vision. So looking towards the future and having the ability to galvanize people to meet some sort of strategic goal in the team or organization.
So in conducting your research, you involved 10 organisations. What type of organisations participated?
We had a variety of organizations. So we had some folks from the manufacturing industry. We had a police force participate. We had an NGO participate. And then we had several private sector organizations participate. And
what was your process in terms of conducting the research?
We took a mixed methods approach. So we interviewed managers and employees, senior leaders, people from human resources across all of the organizations, and we also conducted surveys. So we sent surveys to employees across these companies to gather quantitative data.
And essentially, what were the core findings of the research itself?
Well, there's two core ideas within the paper. The first core idea is that if we look in the news or if we look at in the academic literature, we tend to see examples of senior leadership making unethical decisions or choices, and there's a trickle down effect in that employees then respond and react to those major ethical breaches. Where what we were finding is that it doesn't always work from the top to the bottom, and in fact, it can work from the bottom to the top as well. In that people engage or people experience these micro dilemmas, these micro ethical dilemmas in their day-to-day work, and it's how people respond to these micro dilemmas that then can eventually accumulate into a culture in which it's okay to perhaps do things that may not be considered ethical. So that was one of the core ideas. The other core idea in the paper is around this idea of an ethically strong organizational culture. So an ethically strong organizational culture is one in which it is very clear to everyone what is, I want to say, quote unquote, the right thing to do. So again, we're agnostic to what that right thing is, whether that's politically right or religiously or culturally right. But each organization or a strong culture would have a very clear definition of what is right and what the organization values. So a strong organization is one in which all of the workplace practices, they support and they reinforce and they reward behaviors that are in alignment with what the organization believes and what their values are.
And in your opinion, are leaders born or are they developed?
Well, I firmly believe that leaders are developed. So I think that people certainly develop and change over time. There's a whole host of research on this which suggests that leadership, even things like charisma, can be learned. So, and I would say that I am in education and in a school of business. So I do believe that leadership can be something that can be learned over time.
Now, the traditional thinking about culture was, in order to change the culture, you needed to change the people. What are your thoughts on that?
Culture change is incredibly hard. There's a famous saying in management that culture eats strategy for breakfast. In that regardless of the strategy, if you don't have a culture that will support and rally around that strategy, it's going to fall apart. It's not going to be achieved. So yes, culture is incredibly important, and in order to change it, it's oftentimes necessary to change some people within the organization, whether that's through attrition or whether that's through job reassignment or whether that's through additional hiring. So yes, sometimes, but I'm a very strong believer that people can change, and that with effective leadership, you can change a culture so that it's more innovative or more performance driven or whatever it is that the organization would like it to be.
And from the research that you did, what was the level of awareness among staff in those organisations regarding ethical leadership as a whole?
Not terribly high, I would say. A lot of individuals in our sample, they cared more about, or what was most important to them was having a good relationship with their line manager. So when we're thinking about senior leadership, ethical leadership, those things are definitely important. But when it comes down to increasing employee engagement, improving performance, the role of the line manager cannot be underestimated.
And from your experience, what are the key factors which contribute to ethical leadership?
I'd say the moral compass of the leader, him or herself, is definitely something that is important. The rewards in the organization, so whether ethical leadership is something that's rewarded, something that's valued. Training, so making sure that there's workplace practices that are supportive of behaving this way. But I think a lot of it comes down to rewards in terms of what does the organization value. So a great example of an ethical dilemma is, imagine yourself, you're a manager, and things are, you've got a customer on the line, and the customer says, we really need to make this deal happen. You're not quite sure whether you can pull it off or not, and then the customer says to you, so this weekend we're doing a golf trip. Would you like to come with us? You know that your organization says that you may not go on golf trips with customers, but you also know that if you go on the golf trip, then you'll make this sale, okay? So what do you do? There is no right or wrong answer to that question. That is the definition of a dilemma. We don't know what the right answer is. It depends on the context in which the organization operates. The general point of the issue is that how do other people in the organization, how would they respond to that same ethical dilemma? A strong culture would be one in which everyone responded in the same way. A weak culture would be where we would have a lot of variety in terms of responses.
Now, you mentioned the importance of the moral compass when it comes to ethical leadership. Is there any way for a leader to reset their moral compass?
That's an interesting question. I think having different experiences certainly would reset a person's moral compass. So, having experiences that take you outside of your normal day-to-day work, that allow you to empathize, really get into the shoes of other people, understanding the implications of what it is that you're doing for different stakeholders. So anything that causes a person to get outside of their comfort zone would certainly elaborate or would make a person think differently about what really is the right thing to do in this circumstance.
And where ethical leadership is not of the highest standards, what impact does this have on an organisation?
Well, the research is pretty clear that ethical leadership does lead to higher levels of individual job performance, engagement, motivation, which then presumably kind of trickles down to overall firm performance.
And what practical actions can an organisation take to promote high ethical and integrity values within their business?
I think the first step is to have a clear definition of what that means in a particular context. So senior leadership need to agree on a set of values. What do we believe in? How do we want our people to be behaving on a day-to-day basis? What sort of rules or guidelines do we want to put in place around how we do things around here? And in many organizations, that's not clear. So if senior leadership doesn't know how they would like people to be behaving and acting, then they certainly can't put that into place for the rest of the organization. But once those values are clearly defined, then people need to take a look at all of the workplace practices that are aligned with that.
And in your opinion, what is the single biggest factor which can compromise ethical leadership?
Probably an inability to manage diverging stakeholder needs. So a lot of organizations, a lot of individuals are under pressure, and they're under pressure and they have these dilemmas and they don't know how to respond, because on the one hand, they're going to be rewarded for making the sale, but on the other hand, they know that this isn't the right thing to do. So I think balancing out competing stakeholders would be one of the biggest challenges.
And finally, how does Ireland compare to its international counterparts in the ethical leadership stakes?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. I don't know whether I would assume, based on my own experiences, that Ireland is no more or no less different than what it would be like in other countries. And I think we'd probably find more diversity within Ireland by industry, by sector, than we would in comparing Ireland with, say, the UK or the United States.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was Amanda Shantz from Trinity College Dublin, and I would like to thank Amanda for joining us on this morning's show.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast.